run through the business news stories you need to know about from the continent and beyond. But first, an update from the market. So here in East Africa, Safaricom reported its half-year results today with a 12% rise in net earnings to over $330 million in the 6 months ending in September. There was a 51% rise in the value of mobile money transactions as well. You can expect EBIT in the $868 to $895 million range for the 2022 fiscal year. Gold miners in South Africa, they accounted for the bulk of the rise in the top 40 today. AngloGold Ashanti, Goldfields and Sibanye all closed anywhere between 5.7 and 10.3% higher today. Higher bullion prices have driven those counters higher so far. Here's what's coming up tonight. Nigeria records growth in investment as the economy starts to tentatively recover from COVID-19's impact. We'll explore how Tanzania's central bank is planning to go after loan defaulters. And the UK is urging countries at the COP26 summit to raise their greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. We'll get to those stories in a moment, but let's start in Ethiopia. The United Nations says 72 truck drivers contracted by the World Food Programme there remain in detention tonight. In a statement released on Wednesday, they called on the government to ensure their safety. Now, the drivers were apparently arrested last week on the 3rd of November in the capital of the Afar region. A UN spokesperson says that the UN is liaising with the government, the federal government of Ethiopia, to understand the reasons behind the drivers' detention. The spokesperson added that the drivers were arrested along the only functional road that leads into Tigray. This comes as another 16 local staff members and dependents remain in detention in the Ethiopian capital of Addis Ababa. All right, then Girum Chala is live in Addis tonight with some of the latest on these stories. So, Girum, what's the latest on this wave of arrests that we keep hearing about, especially with respect to Ethiopian nationals? And the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission has flagged this, including the arrest of, as we understand it now, nearly 90 UN employees and contractors.
Well, Ramah, as you've said, arrests have been made. These are UN employees. Some of them are UN contractors, especially those drivers that you've been talking about. And they are now in detention under police custody. We've heard from police source that the investigation is undergoing. We don't know exactly why they have been arrested because we're waiting for a police report to come out, or a press conference for that matter, so that we can understand why these people are under police custody. But we know that the United Nations is already in contact with the Ethiopian Foreign Ministry to get them released. And also they reportedly have visited some of them to know their conditions. 6 people have been released earlier today from those who have been arrested, but by and large, many of them remain to be under police custody, Rama. So Ethiopia is under state of emergency. We should understand that there is a team of people, including security forces, who are going to let us know why these people are in detention. Until then, we don't really know why, but we can confirm detentions have been made, yes.
So we know the federal government is also keen on pursuing its offensive against the TPLF to roll them back away from the key towns we've been speaking about for the last week, Dessie and Kombolcha, and generally out of Amhara province as well. But assuming the TPLF is pushed back into Tigray, would the federal government consider a ceasefire under those conditions?
Well, the conditions you've been mentioning, by the way, are official conditions from the Ethiopian government. The government has said a few days back that the first condition is for Tigray force to return back to their base to Tigray regional state, leaving the Amhara and also Afar regional state. As you know, there are strongholds now being held by the TPLF force, including the 2 strategic towns of Kombolcha and Dessie, and few areas in the Afar regional state. So them going back is one precondition. The other one, the government wants TPLF to be disarmed. Olusegun Obasanjo, by the way, is also urging this kind of a route to be followed by all forces to return to their original places so that dialogue can begin. So to answer your question, Rama, the Ethiopian authorities, in principle, are in agreement for a peaceful resolution of the war that is now taking place in the northern part of the country. They are, however, in close consultation with the African Union team, with a former president of Nigeria, Olusegun Obasanjo, special envoy to the Eastern Africa region. So there is light at the end of a tunnel, but when that light is going to come out, we should wait and see, Rama.
Okay, one last question for you. So this is on the tech side of this. Twitter disabled the trend section in Ethiopia over the weekend. Facebook access has also been limited as well. As this conflict continues, will the federal government cut internet links?
To answer your question directly, we don't really know what's going to happen in the near future or in the long run. But what we do know, there are restrictions at the moment. You cannot access Facebook fully or other applications, including WhatsApp, Telegram, and others. But there are also beyond war reasons for this. Unconfirmed reports are saying because of the ongoing 12th grade examination to avoid, some sort of sending exam papers from one person to the other. The government has blocked some features in these applications, but we cannot confirm that still. But we know that there are internet restrictions, and we don't really know if they are going to continue being an internet blackout in this country as we have seen it before. So this is only going to be a speculation. We have to again wait and see if that's going to be the case or not, Ramah.
All right, Gurum Chala, they're live in Addis Ababa. From East Africa to West Africa, the value of investments in Nigeria announced in the third quarter of 2021 has gone up by 130% year on year. That's according to data from the Nigeria Investment Promotion Commission. CGTN's Kelechi Emekala takes us through the data.
Things are looking up for Nigeria as investment announcements hit $8.99 billion in Q3 of this year, an increase of 130% from the $3.95 billion recorded in the corresponding period of 2020.
It's not as such, because whatever percentage they're using to measure this was compared with a particular year where nobody worked. If we take the investment of foreign direct investment into Nigeria today or foreign portfolio investment into Nigeria today, we won't say we have done well.
So that is to be expected, which is arising from the fact that the economy is fully recovering. And there are many areas where we're actually doing better than before COVID. For example, the transportation that was so badly hit last year has jumped up to over to a 64% increase in activity. The aviation is fully recovered. The industries are picking up. They are all going into positive territory. So there are a lot of investments that are coming into the country right now.
As elsewhere in the world, Nigeria recorded low investment announcements in 2020, $16.74 billion. There was a 44% drop from the $29.91 billion tracked in 2019.
Nigerians expect more in investment. If we didn't have all the vices we have today, the insecurity, the level of corruption that exists today, we would obviously have had good investment or more investment today in the economy.
About 47% of the investment announcements were domestic. Others came in from South Korea, South Africa and Spain.
Investor confidence is very, very critical because insecurity and many things going on in the country send the wrong signal to investors. So when you begin to see enthusiasm of this nature that are demonstrating more confidence, growing confidence of investors, it then means that we're going to have more dollars enter into our foreign reserves, and that will temper the rates of forex.
Sectors that gain the most traction are manufacturing, electricity and gas, information and communications, as well as transportation. With the kickoff of the African Continental Free Trade Area, experts believe that Nigeria could once again emerge as a favorite investment destination, and that will provide employment opportunities, reduce poverty, and boost the nation's GDP. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Barely 24 hours from now, South Africa's new Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana, will deliver the country's proposed spending plans for the next 3 years. Now, the medium-term budget policy statement details the country's revenue and spending targets over the time frame. Despite the devastation caused by COVID, however, South Africa's had a better-than-expected revenue base to work with. Here's CGTN's Sumitra Naidu exploring what you can expect.
The last 2 years have been particularly hard due to COVID, more so because the South African economy was already struggling before the infections began. Interestingly, for the first time in a while, South Africa is sitting with higher revenues.
We had very good collections in the commodity markets. Commodity companies have done exceptionally well and are paying good taxes. So they've collected far more than they thought they would.
But the commodities rebound may be short-lived. The new minister, Uganda, still needs to concentrate on balancing the books.
We're actually sitting with a situation where mining taxes are supposedly about 25% of corporate income taxes. So we have been gifted this commodity price windfall. I think expectations are very high of Minister Uganda to see what will that windfall actually be spent on, or will some of that actually reticulate into fiscal savings this year.
So even though the minister has more revenues to work with, there's still a major concern about the country's high debt situation and the cost of servicing that debt. Another major concern is the public sector wage bill. Over 20% of tax revenues goes towards servicing debt. The public sector wage bill also eats into revenues. Many are wondering whether the minister will continue the path to fiscal consolidation or start spending again to lift the economy and create jobs.
Where we are quite concerned is again around the wage bill and if there are any permanent forms of expenditure, such as a basic income grant, which is also being bandied about at the moment. We are still dealing with quite a significant debt burden if we look at it in rand terms. And of course, servicing that debt burden becomes quite expensive.
And we can't grow without electricity. We can't grow without power. And, we're back in stage 4. So the government's got lots of issues. And it's, I think the message through to them from the election is just start doing what you were appointed to do. Start doing it. Start taking your job seriously.
A real baptism of fire for the new minister as he tries to steady the ship. The ratings agencies will also be watching closely for news on structural reforms and plans to address the electricity crisis. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
On to East Africa. Fish exporters and processors in Uganda are deeply worried that they could soon be run entirely out of business because of dwindling fish stocks. Figures from the Bank of Uganda show that fish exports dropped from $10.6 million worth in January to just $6.6 million in July. And that decline is showing no signs of slowing down. CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga explains why.
It's not business as usual at this factory in Entebbe. Fish processors say they are operating below previous levels.
You'd be having all morning and most of the afternoon trucks coming to offload fish. You'd have at least 25 tons of fish offloaded, put in ice. The capacity of this factory is to produce more than 50 tons of ice every day. So we calculate for every kilo of fish, you need about 2 kilos of ice. You'd see very many employees compared to what we have now.
From 5 days a week, the factory now operates 3 days a week. On a busy day, this factory would process about 50 tons of fish per day, but this has reduced drastically to 10 tons per day, something that is worrying fish exporters. Fish processors say illegal fishing methods are denying them enough raw material to process. Most of the Nile perch fish is harvested as immature fish illegally, and it never reaches the factory. The fish is then sold to illegal markets, more specifically to the Democratic Republic of Congo, leaving the factories with nothing to process. The fish processors are now worried that could force them to close.
We have fixed costs that are very high, so it obviously affects enormously our profits. And the risk is, of course, if you go into sustained losses, you may end up by just stopping your operations.
But local authorities say they won't let this happen.
We are going to fight this and we're not going to sleep, we're not going to sit. This must stop. We need proteins in our country. We need the products of fish. We need to help our country to put value addition to the fish.
Fish exports are among Uganda's top foreign exchange earners. The government has now beefed up the fish protection unit with more personnel working to stop illegal fishing. And as the government casts the net wide to increase the stock in Lake Victoria, exporters like Borel are hopeful that they will get enough perch to keep in business. Hilary Ayesiga, CGTN, Entebbe, Central Uganda.
All right, then a quick run through some company headlines starting in the world of telecommunications. Starting with Safaricom, as I mentioned a little earlier, results for the half year coming out today. Net earnings for the period going up by 12.1% to $331.5 million, compared out to $295.8 million posted in a similar period a year ago. Profits before tax up by 22% to $692 million, compared to $567 as of September 30th, 2020. Decent numbers all round. South Africa's Vodacom Group said on Wednesday it will be buying a 55% stake in the Egyptian arm of parent Vodafone Group for $2.7 billion. This comes as it's looking to consolidate its presence on the continent and boost its earnings. Now, the company could potentially be looking to expand its newly launched VodaPay digital financial services super app in the Egyptian market as well. In aviation, the Emirates Group, owner of the world's largest long-haul carrier, prior to the global COVID-19 pandemic, has posted a $1.6 billion loss in the first half of the year. And that compares to a $3.4 billion loss in the same period last year. Despite the loss, revenue was up over 85% to just under $6 billion. And the state-owned company did get a capital injection of about $680 million in the first half of the year from its owner, the government of Dubai. And finally, the alphabet unit Google has lost an appeal against a $2.8 billion European antitrust decision on Wednesday. Google's loss is a major win for the bloc's competition chief in the first of 3 court rulings that will strengthen the EU's push to regulate big tech. The EU Commission had sanctioned the world's most popular internet search engine back in 2017 for favouring its own price comparison shopping service and essentially giving it an unfair advantage against smaller rivals in Europe. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up. We'll explore how Tanzania's central bank is going after loan defaulters within the banking industry and government. And is financial inclusion in Nigeria under threat, given a mass shutdown of bank branches and NTMs? We'll explore that next.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference. Welcome back to the program. Let's head over to Tanzania. The central bank over there has been taking a broad range of measures to try and stabilize the banking industry, including merging small banks which have woefully inadequate capital bases. Now, the ratio of non-performing loans as a percentage of total private sector debt in Tanzania was about 9.4% back in March. Now, while that's over 100 basis points lower on a year-on-year basis, it's still nearly twice the Bank of Tanzania's target of 5%. The BOT says its investigations have found that employees of some banks and financial institutions are directly responsible for, as it puts it, issuing loans without following procedures, fraud, or other practices that essentially tantamount to a lack of integrity. End of quote. It said, among other things, commercial banks are now required to take legal action against such employees, and the regulator will blacklist them and prevent them from working anywhere in the financial sector in Tanzania. The thing is, though, as far back as 2018, the IMF had warned Tanzanian authorities that a combination of insufficient loan loss provisions and inadequate capital needed to be urgently addressed. And since then, as we've pointed out, there's been a flurry of consolidation in the banking sector. It's taken the number of commercial banks over there down to 38. But given the ongoing concerns about capital adequacy, should you expect that trend to continue? That's a question I put to Ivan Terimo, who's a co-founder and partner at Bankable.
The answer is yes. I would expect to see more consolidation pressure because of this. And the BOT has made it quite clear that they are supporting strategic consolidations into the market to see fewer but stronger institutions making for deeper markets rather than what we have now.
There's a bit of a puzzle I'm trying to square here, because I look at where the NPLs are concentrated, right? It's trade at 18%, hotels and restaurants at 15%, which sort of makes sense if you look at the wider damage inflicted by COVID in the job market. But then I look at the statement that came out of the central bank over the weekend, and the 4 action points mostly focus on issues to do with bank staff. So, for example, there's a part here where the governor is basically saying that we're going to require banks and financial institutions whose employees have non-performing loans with other banks or financial institutions to submit details of their employees to the Credit Reference Bureau. It seems like the central bank is addressing a completely different problem vis-a-vis what the size of NPLs actually are.
Well, I think it's a good question that you ask, and obviously one needs to get the context to sort of then now understand where this is coming from. Number one, it's coming from a review conducted by the central bank across the banks within the supervisory powers and the inspections that they do, the information they request, etc. And I think within that review, they've seen results that have informed them of an issue of NPLs relating to more personnel-related issues.
What about the credit reference side of this? Because reading this statement also raises a few other questions. Because when the central bank is saying that these details about delinquent borrowers need to be shared with credit reference bureaus, by implication, that seems to imply that negative and positive data is not automatically shared among credit reference bureaus among the banks in Tanzania. Am I reading that right?
Well, I for one, as a banker, know the banks are contributing information. And certainly, again, we always need to keep the skew of the market. It is very important to understand in this market. Certainly, I would expect all the top 10 banks to do this, and even the others. And just by the top 10 doing it, you have almost 80% of the market adhering to this. So we need to contextualize whether we're dealing with fringe issues or we're dealing with issues that are at the core of the industry in terms of reporting information to CRB. And I think the norm or the rule is that most of the banks are doing this quite religiously. Perhaps if there's some exceptions on some names of some banks, perhaps, but I think this has been working fairly well.
Couldn't the argument be made that perhaps this also does point to a bit of regulatory laxity? Because, I mean, you look at things like the argument that the BOT is making here, requiring banks to submit details of civil servants or of non-performing loans to their employers for further appropriate action, or to essentially tell bank employees who the central bank, in more often than not, would have very clear supervision over, to provide information on their loan status and their insider loan status. I mean, the question, I guess, is how would all of this have happened, and yet the central bank has supervision of the sector and it just flies under the radar?
Well, I would always classify our central bank, the BOT, as a very conservative one, and we've seen that through how they manage, if it's the financial markets, if it's currency, if it's KYC, it's many issues, and I don't think that signature is any different when we come to look at things such as NPLs and examinations. I tend to see the message behind this message, and that to me is one of heightening the sense of vigilance that the banks need to use, and within which they are announcing their stance with how they will actually look at things going forward. There are things that I know as a banker there are already happening. If I'm an employee and I'm moving from one bank into another, and have outstanding debt of one bank, my new bank will not take me on board without knowing fully my position and that it's not in any way delinquent. So there are things that are already happening in the market.
All right, then a bigger breaking news coming out of COP26. Of course, we'll cover this a little later on in the hour as well. China and the United States, the world's top two economies, have announced a joint declaration on climate change at the COP26 summit. They've reiterated their commitment to observing the Paris Climate Agreement to keep an increase in average global temperatures to under 2 degrees. They've also agreed to accelerate greenhouse gas and carbon gas emission reduction by jointly working with other countries. China and the US also reached a consensus on climate finance and Paris NDC goals. Those are nationally determined contributions. They will, of course, be maintaining policy dialogue on renewable energy in an effort to reduce the amount of electricity generated through the use of coal. We'll, of course, have more details on that particular declaration in subsequent programs. The footage you're seeing on your screens at the moment is live from Glasgow. And we'll, of course, get back to COP26 a little later on in the hour. Let's get back into banking. Diamond Trust Bank has unveiled its China coverage department. It'll be catering specifically to Chinese firms operating within East Africa. In partnership with Habib Bank, DTB has also announced a new range of products, including direct convertibility of yuan remittances from the Kenyan shilling and a range of RMB-based credit facilities.
Our idea is to actually create a seamless relationship and let the people trade, let the countries industrialize, and the bedrock of financial logic, seamless financial relationship and movement will be ensured by DTB and HBL.
Through our linkage with HBL, we can now say we have an open door to China. Our aim is for DTB to play its role in linking up the Chinese and East African business community by enabling payment for goods, imports, and exports in local currencies seamlessly. By facilitating the direct remittance in local currencies for Chinese citizens and local traders dealing with China-based companies, we're opening a world of opportunities for both countries.
Nigerian banks closed 234 branches and about 650 or so ATMs last year. That's according to a report from the International Monetary Fund. Now, the global body believes that might negatively affect financial inclusion in Africa's largest economy. But some experts disagree. In fact, they argue that, look, between the rise of agency banking in the country and, of course, the expansive use of mobile money, that will make up for any losses that may emerge. CGTN's Deji Badimosi has that argument.
With government-imposed lockdown in the heat of the coronavirus pandemic last year, virtually every Nigerian bank had to adjust their operations, introducing remote working into their system. Many bank branches were shut down, and in some cases, a number of workers laid off.
As a matter of fact, because of COVID and to be compliant, a number of commercial banks had rotated activities where they told some of their staff to work in a week, and the following week they asked them to go home, perhaps sometimes for a week, sometimes for 2 weeks, to see if any of them will show symptoms.
Advancement in technology has made it possible for banks to provide services to end users or to consumers without necessarily being physically present. So in some locations where the volume of physical transactions does not justify their physical presence, the bank may need to review their physical presence in those locations.
And it's not just bank branches that were shut down. A number of banks deactivated some of their automated teller machines, ATM. Even though the economy has since reopened, most of the bank branches that were shut down still remain shut. And the deactivated ATMs don't seem like they're going to be reactivated anytime soon. In place of the shut bank branches and ATMs, agency banking appears to be taking over. In recent time, there's been an explosion of mobile money agents using POS to deliver basic banking services such as cash deposits and withdrawals.
Some banks have extended their branches, quote and unquote, to the POS point. They've registered quite a number of agents to run their agency banking for them, and this is also make penetration and those who are banked to be more.
The Central Bank of Nigeria recently gave approval to some of the major mobile telecom firms like MTN and Airtel to start mobile banking services in the country. That is expected to lead to further explosion of mobile money services across Nigeria and boost the country's financial inclusion goal.
With both service providers who are major network providers leveraging on their huge market share and customer base to provide financial services to the unbanked and the underbanked. We should be able to see situations where people who previously were not having access to financial system will now have access to financial system, and therefore we should see an improvement in financial system inclusiveness, as well as more effectiveness of monetary policies.
Nigeria had aimed to achieve 80% financial inclusion of its adult population by last year, but it missed the target. Roughly 38 million adults are still left out. But with the expected rapid growth in mobile money services, it might only be a matter of time before that ground is covered. Deji Badimosi, CGTN, Lagos.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a break. Here's what's coming up. The UK is asking countries at the COP26 summit to raise their targets to cutting greenhouse gas emissions. And the China International Import Expo wraps up with tentative deals worth over $70 billion.
Change is on the horizon. Through the shifting of time, Africa's emerging tech landscape is creating new channels.
There's a hunger for local African content globally.
Shaped by innovation, carved out by a new generation of digital entrepreneurs, sculpted by a mobile revolution, and trickling down to the most remote corners of the continent. TechSpot is seeking out the new concepts in technology, disrupting Africa's traditional sectors.
You're watching breaking news on CGTN.
Welcome to the world today on CGTN.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to the program. Let's run through some of the stories making headlines at this hour. Starting in Ethiopia, the United Nations says that 72 truck drivers contracted by the World Food Programme are still in detention. In a statement released on Wednesday, it called on the federal government of Ethiopia to ensure their safety. The drivers were arrested on the 3rd of November in the capital of the Afar region. A UN spokesperson says the UN is liaising with the federal government to understand the reasons behind their detention. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, some 27 million people are food insecure. The Food and Agriculture Organization and the World Food Programme fear that this food crisis could worsen in the months to come. Even if food is attainable, high prices and falling incomes essentially mean that many people are unable to actually afford proper food. The latest IPC report says that the alarming hunger numbers are likely to remain unchanged through the first half of 2022. General Gilbert Diondre, a key defendant in the trial over the 1987 assassination of Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader Thomas Sankara, has pleaded not guilty at landmark proceedings there. Now, the trial is taking place in a military court in the capital, Ouagadougou. Diondre was allegedly an architect of a coup during which Sankara and 12 of his colleagues were gunned down by a hit squad some 34 years ago. And finally, away from the continent, Japan's lower house of parliament has re-elected Fumio Kishida as the country's prime minister. Kishida's post-election cabinet is expected to be officially announced later on, and it's expected to be largely unchanged as the government begins to work on a new pandemic stimulus package. That said, Kishida has appointed Yoshimasa Hayashi as the country's new foreign minister. That's a run through your headlines. Now, the British hosts of the COP26 climate conference are calling on countries to raise their ambitions to cut greenhouse gas emissions by the end of 2022. In a draft summit text which is being negotiated and will be negotiated rather aggressively, you should point out, over the next 3 days. Now, the proposal underscores concerns that there's a huge gap between the current national pledges and the rapid emission cuts that are actually needed to keep the world from tilting over into a full-blown climate crisis. The first draft of the conference conclusion must now be negotiated by the near 200 countries who are represented in Glasgow and agreed to by the close of this two-week event on Friday. In the landmark Paris Accord some 6 years ago, countries agreed to work to limit global warming to below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Let's bring you up to speed with the latest summit outcomes from COP26. Oliver Reagan is there, joins us now live from Glasgow. So, Oliver, do we know what the main points of disagreement are on this draft among countries at COP26?
Well, of course, one of the big factors on this document today was about the phasing out of fossil fuels, namely coal. And this is the first time those words have ever appeared on a UN document of this kind, and it's a big commitment. But the fact of the matter is that unless the big coal-based economies and unless the Gulf states that are based on an oil-based economy are going to sign up to this, then you have to ask, how effective is this agreement going to be unless everybody's pulling in the same direction? Now, there's big discussions about money, of course. The poorer nations who are being affected by climate change the most, they want commitments that they're going to be supported effectively and efficiently enough in the years to come. That needs to be agreed. And then take something like transport. That was one of the key topics of today, and we saw some good progress. Countries, cities and certain companies came together to limit the use, to actually phase out the use of fossil fuel-based vehicles by 2040. But that didn't include the United States, it didn't include Germany. Volkswagen and Toyota, the two biggest automotive companies in the world, they also didn't sign up to this agreement. So, as you can see, we're making progress in certain ways, but other countries are pulling in a different direction, and there's a lot of work to be done in the coming days.
Indeed. So this draft, of course, it's not legally binding. It doesn't really have the force of law. Greenpeace, in fact, has described it as inadequate. Is that the general feeling among delegates there?
There's definitely an air of frustration here. Take the clause in the contract on greenhouse gases. Well, countries are being asked to come back next year with some more tangible plans, something more ambitious, and that kind of gives you an insight into the fact that what we're expecting to come out of this conference perhaps isn't going to be ambitious enough, and they're going to have to come back again next year. We saw a protest earlier on in the main conference hall by Fridays for Future, a young group of climate activists. They were unhappy, and many of the people that I'm talking to are saying that this conference is not going to actually be ambitious enough. We're not going to see the agreements we need, and that the 1.5 that is the whole aim of the conference, to keep that 1.5 degree clause alive, well, we're going to fail miserably on that unless something drastic happens over the coming days.
Indeed, some interesting negotiations to take place between now and Friday. We'll see what comes out of the summit. Oliver Reagan there live in Glasgow. Now, the New York City, there are two pretty obvious ways to spot how climate change is changing the city. One, there's an uptick in severe storms and higher temperatures. Two, heat. There's a lot more of it, and it's becoming a more pernicious killer. Karina Huber has warned what is being described as urban heat islands and how people of color in low-income neighborhoods are coping.
New York City has always been known for its humid summers, but climate change is making the streets hotter and more humid than ever before. Temperatures have been steadily rising, and heat waves are expected to become more frequent. The New York City Panel on Climate Change predicts the number of heat waves in the city will triple by 2080, leading to an uptick in deaths.
The most significant cause of human deaths from any kind of climate or weather-related event is from heat.
Cities are more vulnerable to heat waves because most are covered in heat-trapping concrete and asphalt, creating so-called urban heat islands.
Central Park and other green spaces can provide some relief from the heat islands as they cool down the temperatures in the surrounding areas. Problem is, the majority of green spaces in New York are found in more affluent neighborhoods where there are fewer minority communities.
Lower income neighborhoods like Mott Haven in the South Bronx are much hotter in the summer than in other parts of the city.
I'm literally feeling the temperature. My body is feeling a temperature at 10, sometimes to 15 degrees hotter than what the actual weather and temperature is.
According to city data, Mott Haven has some of the lowest tree cover in New York. Access to air conditioning is also limited, making it very hard for residents like Barber to escape the heat.
So literally on days 90-degree heat, 100-degree heat, we're supposed to take our children to parks that have no trees in it.
African Americans are twice as likely to die of heat exposure than white New Yorkers. McPherson, who has been studying the issue of urban heat islands and climate justice for a decade, attributes the disparity to historically racist policies.
Racist policies over many, many decades meant that some neighborhoods were developed with parks, were developed with street trees as part of their design, and those tend to be the wealthier neighborhoods. Other neighborhoods were not invested in, and so they're hotter.
In recent years, city leaders have planted 1 million trees, distributed free air conditioners to low-income people aged 60, and started a campaign to paint rooftops white to deflect the heat. McPherson applauds the efforts, but says more needs to be done.
My hope is that we don't have to wait for a devastating heat wave to take much more dramatic action on addressing the causes, the fundamental causes of heat in the city, which is lack of vegetation, lack of reflective surfaces, and really helping those who need it most.
Karina Huber, CGTN, New York.
Across the Pacific now to the just concluded China International Import Expo. CGTN's Yang Qingxi has the details on the outcomes from the 2021 event.
This marks the end of one of China's biggest business events of the year. Organizers say some 480,000 people visited the expo, and tentative deals worth $70.7 billion were signed.
The pavilion of the Import Expo is a very lively place because every few minutes there is a deal signing ceremony.
The medical pavilion offered 135 new products and technologies. That's the highest among all pavilions.
German-based medical firm Boehringer Ingelheim signed a deal with a district government in southwest China's Chengdu city for a stroke rehabilitation center.
I think CIE represents a great opportunity to meet different provincial governments and also different partners. So it brings together the important stakeholders for future development.
Chinese purchasers also hailed the SIIE as a platform to deepen strategic relations with foreign partners.
If it weren't for this platform, our collaboration with that partner would be limited to a technical level. But thanks to the expo, we have now built strategic collaborations.
The annual CIIE has been running since 2018, and each year we've seen a growing number of exhibitors utilizing this giant expo and the latest technologies to expand their business opportunities. Some have used live streaming in their pavilions to promote companies and products and even to recruit potential talents. The use of new technologies was not limited to exhibitors. Expo organizers also made good use of them. Because of the ongoing pandemic, organizers set up online exhibitions for participating countries and international institutions for the first time.
China's virtual pavilion was welcomed by many people both at home and abroad. The site has been visited over 58 million times.
It's been 4 years since the first Import Expo was held, and since then, the event has become more versatile in finding new ways to promote business. Yang Chengxi, CGTN, Shanghai.
Double 11, named because, of course, it takes place on the 11th day, the 11th month of the year, starts the day after the CIIE comes to a close. Last year, goods worth over $115 billion were traded across platforms owned by Alibaba and JD.com. This year, exhibitors in the world's largest shopping event are looking at how to make the user experience more convenient online and offline. Chen Tong takes up that story.
What if something catches your eye whilst you're touring an exhibition hall? Well, it's as easy as scanning a QR code, which then leads you to the online shopping mall where you can enjoy all your Double 11 discounts.
It's not the first time products displayed at the expo are for sale during the Double 11 shopping festival. But this year, vendors are making purchasing their products much more easier.
Sportswear brand Skechers has been attending the China International Import Expo for 3 years now. But it's the first time they put a QR code beside each product, allowing attendees to purchase the products that interests them in an instant.
Last year, during our exhibition, so many customer visitors has expressed that they want to buy our products. So it's an inspiration for us. We want to bring the online shopping experience. We want to integrate online and offline here in our expo.
And the sellers' enthusiasm is stemming from the increasing popularity of imported products in China. Data from the e-commerce site Tmall shows that from 2019 to 2020, sales of imported products recorded an increase of more than 47% during the Double 11 festival. And displays at the expo this year have become an impetus for local visitors to buy.
I saw many new items like food, clothes, and shoes, which definitely piqued my interest.
I saw some stuffed toys that I want to buy. I'm going to compare the online and offline prices first, though.
In addition to Skechers, there are many international products making their debut at this year's Expo and Double 11 Festival. Huge brands like L'Oreal, P&G, and Estee Lauder will be showcasing their CIIE exhibits on Tmall.
Build their new products at CIIE and sell them on Tmall. This has gradually become a regular routine for foreign brands to enter the Chinese market.
Foreign companies are more than ready for China's shopping gala, with at least 300 million imported products currently stocked on Tmall, waiting to be delivered into the hands of Chinese consumers. Chen Tong, CGTN, Shanghai.
Over 3 million electric and hybrid cars are expected to be sold in China this year alone. That's more than half the global volume and double last year's number. The China Association of Automobile Manufacturers made that prediction back in October as sales of hybrid vehicles beat expectations. Huang Fei visited BYD in Shenzhen to find out what might be holding the industry back.
It's another blockbuster month for Chinese battery and electric car company BYD. October sales for new energy passenger cars were triple the same month last year, with more than 80,000 units. Although pure battery-powered models have been growing in popularity, plug-in hybrids are still the best sellers.
We've benefited from the explosive growth in the overall market. 334,000 electric cars were sold in China in September, a fifth of all new cars. Our sales is driven by many world-leading and industry-disruptive technologies, such as the Blade battery and the DMI super hybrid powertrain. They have increased our range to 1,200 kilometers on a single charge.
China is promoting electric cars, which could help reduce air pollution and climate change, with policies to restrict new petrol cars and subsidies to buyers. Finance professor Wu Haifeng has experienced some of the incentives firsthand.
And I got subsidies of purchasing a green car, as well as I don't have to wait for at least half a year to getting a blue plate, which is the traditional plate, right? From the energy point of view, it's a lot cheaper. And when you drive the e-cars, I feel better. I think I contribute certain things to promote carbon neutrality.
However, concerns about long-distance travel is one reason many people are holding off from buying pure electric models. As hundreds of millions of travelers hit the road for the National Day holiday last month, charging facilities on motorways were stretched to the limit. Some drivers said they had to line up for 4 hours to charge their vehicle. China already has the world's largest charging network for electric vehicles, with over 2 million stations. But experts say the infrastructure is still falling short of demand in some places. On average, there is 1 charging station for every 3 electric cars. And for public charging facilities, that number could double. Since 2015, the government has required all new residential buildings to install charging posts in every parking space. But experts say adding charging circuits in old neighborhoods remains a challenge. Elsewhere, the infrastructure has largely followed the money. Charging points are concentrated in central business districts, where the commercial returns of running the plugs are much higher.
So more and more cars will be crowded in the cities, but no one's going to use it in rural areas. Bear in mind, in China, more than 50% of population living in the rural areas, 70% population live in not the top-tier cities or not top-tier first-tier cities. The question is how to incentivize the station investors to invest at the low utility areas of those infrastructures.
Another speed bump may be batteries. Market analysts are warning of an acute shortage of lithium from 2022. And environmentalists point to the problem of disposing the toxic chemical once the batteries run out. BYD says its 35,000-strong research team is working on recycling technologies and hopes to apply them at scale once there is widespread industry need. Hong Fei, CGTN, Shenzhen.
All right, then a quick update on commodity prices. Let's start in gold. Gold prices on the spot market 1.5% higher at 1530 GMT. But even at these levels, bullion prices are still slightly negative on a year-to-date basis. Inflation data coming out of the US today is partly responsible for the bump that we're seeing today, as traders essentially are looking for flight to safety here. US consumer prices in October, they rose at the fastest pace in 3 decades, standing at 6.2% year-on-year, 0.9% higher month-on-month. The energy index nearly 5% higher on an annual basis. The US President saying some hours ago that reining in energy prices is a top priority. Here's what's coming up next. An award-winning Ivorian engineer is helping farmers turn waste into compost. That story is coming up next.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climate and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
I've been Tunis, Cairo, Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Our last story in the hour comes from Cote d'Ivoire. Award-winning bio-waste converters are there helping farmers turn mountains of agricultural byproducts into compost for their fields or even gas for their cooking stoves. As CGTN's Nokutule Shabalala now reports, it's a significant step towards achieving carbon neutrality and diversifying households away from high-emission fuels like firewood and charcoal.
Turning waste into gas or compost has been a major shift for farmers in Cote d'Ivoire, thanks to the Kubeko bio-waste converter. The process includes adding organic matter, sawdust and cocoa pods. You then mix everything together in the Kubeko box and wait for a month.
We will easily reach 40 tons per hectare per year because with this fertilizer, it is natural, it is organic, it's appropriate for our ground, for our fields. We expect to triple our production.
The dry waste contains carbon, the wet waste contains nitrogen. Together, it makes a good mix. Founder of the Kubeko box, Ngusan, says he saw an opportunity to make use of the 30 million tons of waste generated by crop production in the West African country each year, and other waste like animal dung.
Lono's ambition is to make the valorization of organic waste accessible to everyone, not only in Côte d'Ivoire or Africa, but everywhere, because it's a raw material that everyone has access to. So the gas that is coming out of here is injected into the bag. We see here a bag with a volume of 1.5 cubic meters, more or less, and it can burn for 2 hours. So the 1 cubic meter Kubeko here can fill up the bag twice.
The invention of the Kubeko box has netted Ngosan an invention award with over $33,000 from the Royal Academy of Engineering. At the time, his team had already installed 50 composters at Ivorian cocoa, palm oil and mango farms, working to lower production costs from $800 to $700 to help make it affordable for potential customers.
Today, the demand is real, but the pilot project showed something. It enabled us to confirm that buying a Kubeko is a profitable investment for a farmer. So the question was, would buying the equipment enable you to be cost-effective?
Under the initiative, the company also produces biodigesters that can fuel 2 hours of cooking on the gas generated from 5 kilograms of waste per day, while producing liters of liquid compost. According to a 2018 report by the European Commission, this kind of gas could be a sustainable alternative source of cleaner energy in rural areas in West Africa. Noktula Shabalala, CGTN.
And we wrap up the program with a run through the currencies. Some interesting data coming out of Kenya. Q2 data, a bit late, but coming through nonetheless today. 10% growth in the second quarter of the year on year, which is pretty straightforward. It was actually a lot higher than a lot of economists had expected. So it essentially feeds into the wider perception that we're going to have much stronger growth in 2021 vis-a-vis 2020, given the pandemic restrictions that we did have last year. However, with respect to the Kenyan shilling, we did see a fairly low print, 111.90 coming up in the market today. That's a run through your currencies, and that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program in the last hour. Many ways to get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. Well, today's up next from Washington, D.C.